how education sector needs to be modified. Around 12 to 15% of the total budget is being invested in education. One of the reasons which I would always like to project back into the economy, saying that there was a committee that was created known as the Tapas Majumdar Committee. India is also becoming a pioneer when it comes to the digital education. Good morning and welcome to the fifth session of Human Capital Formation. We were talking about a lot of sectors and the contribution of human capital formation in the GDP process, in the economic development progress. Today we are going to talk about a very interesting and yet the most formative sector of India, and that is called as the education sector. So in the entire session, we are going to focus about how education sector needs to be modified, how it needs to be looked into in terms of developing the country and improving the economic situation of India. So just moving forward, let's have a quick look into the topic and then we will get into in-depth of the topic. Moving forward. The topic for the day is education sector in India. This is the broadest topic and this is the most emerging topic for an economy like India, which is going to come up in a big way. So quickly going forward, let's try to understand, analyze and look into the importance of education as the economic forefront altogether. Now let's start going forward. Now, the education sector in India comprises of different formations, different factors altogether. So, the percentage of education expenditure of the total government versus the total expenditure made by the government needs to reflect how much the government is investing in terms of education. Now, for example, if 100% of the budget is going to be looked forward, and when I'm going to do a pie chart analysis of that, let's say that around 12 to 15% of the total budget is being invested in education. That shows the priority, that shows the importance the government has done in terms of educating the people. Now, right from the year 1955 onwards till 2002, we have been able to see a constant projection in terms of growth rate. Why? Because our GDP grew from almost 0.64 to that of 4.02% in terms of GDP. And as the GDP grew, we also gave importance, we also gave a lot of priority to the education sector. Now, if you look here, from a 7.92% in expenditure, it went up as high as 13.17. Currently, we are spending about over 15%, roughly about 17.5% of our total GDP is now being projected towards the education sector. Why is this priority being given is all because we have felt that education is the primary makeover, the primary change agent that can bring an economic progress to the country. And this is absolutely without question that how education has been transforming the nation right from the day of independence till today. So there has always been a push, there has always been a lot of reforms, transformations that have been brought into the sector, and every government has been trying to emphasize on the part that both the state and the central government should take this as a priority, should take this as a motto to transform India altogether. Now, if you look here in GDP, probably the top three sectors that India is concentrating as of right now is education, healthcare and infrastructure. These are the top three sectors which I would like to present to you today, because these sectors are going to be the most emerging sectors in the coming years. Probably the same idea came to us in the year 2002-2005. Why? Because we were started to becoming a nation that could probably look into the world as the knowledge hub, as a manufacturing hub, and also the ideal economic growth engine. So that is why from 2002 onwards, there has been even more higher emphasis, even more higher priority given to the education sector. So from our GDP standpoint, today we are making a shift in terms of the thinking, in terms of allocation from railways, from defense, from the other sectors. We are also making our priority towards education, healthcare and infrastructure. So now moving forward, throughout the period, that is, I'm going to talk about from 1955 to 2002, quite a bit of old data, but still quite important for us to know. Why? Because during that sector, the expenditure has not been uniform. That's one of the reasons why we have been struggling in terms of understanding the factors of educational growth. Because in India, what has happened here is that education, though it is considered to be a priority, but the allocation amount has never been a constant value. It has never been like a sector of railways or defense, where a constant amount has been always projected, always been given, so that the growth happens simultaneously, the growth happens continuously. So that is one of the reasons why you would see that the education sector was on priority sometimes and was on a decline sometimes. So this is one of the reasons which I would always like to project back into the economy, saying that there needs to be some sort of push, there needs to be some sort of consistency in terms of promoting education, in terms of making education the top priority of the nation. Similarly, if we start including the private expenditure incurred by individuals and the philanthropic institutions, the total education expenditure should be much more higher. Now, for a country like India, education became a system, or education became a part where maximum donations started arriving, where people wanted to take this as a part of the society transformation, as a part of CSR initiative, corporate social responsibility, or probably trying to do something good for the society altogether. So most of the private organizations also wanted to enter the field of education. They also wanted to create their own universities, own colleges, schools, and they've started providing a lot of aid to this sector. But even though this was happening at one side, at one part or one corner of our country, the other side was that the government was not making a regular expenditure towards it. So at some point, what happened is that the private sector tried to remodify the situation altogether, and they started taking the ownership by coming into private universities, deemed universities under the UGC Act. So the education sector started seeing a transformation right after 2002, where a lot of private universities, schools and colleges were promoted by the government, and they were given a little bit of liberty and concession in terms of starting new schools or new colleges altogether. Similarly, our major focus was on the elementary education. When I say this elementary education, I am typically talking about the school foundation till up to 5th standard or 6th standard, which is very, very important in terms of the growth of a child. So that's a major share of the total expenditure and in terms of the education factor altogether. But to start an elementary school and start providing quality education to the children in India, we also require necessary human capital. That is, we need trained teachers, we need qualified teachers who can support this initiative. Unfortunately, what happened in India is that though there were a lot of schools open, lot of licensing was given in that area, liberty was given in that area, the sector was not able to pick up because of the unqualified teachers, because of the lack of human resources altogether. So most of the time, if you look into the elementary education system of India, especially in the government sector, they were not able to make a very good impact altogether. Most of the schools in the rural India were not able to survive because the lack of teachers, lack of infrastructural facilities, and there was not much of technology conversion that was happening altogether. So the government of India felt at some point of time that we need to focus on the elementary education, we need to focus at the grassroots level much more rather than just building up higher education institutes altogether. So that becomes a very, very interesting and an important topic for all of us to understand. Unless and until a country starts focusing at the grassroots level, the elementary education, if you're not able to give a strong fundamental basic knowledge to a child, there will not be a possibility or there will not be a use when that child starts growing up and starts attaining higher degrees or for a research institution altogether. So it is mandatory for the government to focus more on the elementary education, create more facilities, more benefits, and start promoting the concept of elementary education, making it a mandatory source of growth altogether. Now, moving forward, though on an average, I would like to make the statement, the government spends less on tertiary expenditure, that is on the tertiary education altogether in the sector. Probably the tertiary education has got more value and it has got more investment when compared to elementary. Now, what is a tertiary education all about? Let me try to break up the education sector for you so that you will be able to understand what are the phases, what are the parameters inside the education system of India. We have a primary, what we call it as elementary. Then we have something called as the secondary education, which is starting from 6th standard to 10th standard. Then we have higher secondary education starting from your PUC, and after that we have the graduation and post-graduation altogether, what we call it as UG and PG formation altogether. So now you see the formation here, the primary, secondary, higher secondary, and then you start moving towards your undergrads and your post-graduation program. In all the sector, there has definitely been a high priority, a high investment when it comes to the college level education. There are a lot of institutions and universities that have been started in India post 2002, which has been trying to focus upon all kinds of degrees, all kinds of research, all kinds of post-graduation facilities altogether. Now, you could probably see a lot of universities who are in sprawling acres of land with all kind of modern facilities and benefits which have been started in North India, South, and probably in the West side altogether. The reason here is that people have always felt that the tertiary education is more important than the elementary education, and commercially seeing also the viability is more, the feasibility is more in terms of the higher education rather than the elementary education. This is where we went fundamentally wrong. The reason is that government should have given more focus on the elementary education first rather than the tertiary education. Now, moment a child is able to read, write, and speak well, automatically the child can go for higher orders of degree. But unfortunately, what happened in India is that the expenditure or the investment that went to the higher levels of education started moving up at a faster pace rather than the lower level education, that is the elementary or the primary education. So what happens here is that the financial resources should not be transferred from tertiary to that of elementary. Now, we cannot block the tertiary education. That is, we cannot block the higher education system and say that stop doing on colleges, stop building on the research institution. Rather, we need to make a focus. We need to create a complete ideology, a format, a structure, which will actually try to focus only on the elementary education first. Let's try to build the elementary education. Let's try to build a system that is very composite, that gives more priority and importance to the primary education first. Let's try to improve the schools. Let's try to go to the rural India, try to understand what are the challenges the students are facing in terms of education. It might be the student-teacher ratio, it might be in terms of the benefits factor, it might be in terms of technology, it might be in terms of understanding. There are so many factors that come into picture. But what is that they have been able to do, that they have been able to understand, matters a lot. So it is very, very important here. It is very, very useful that we need to start focusing on the elementary level first. It is no point in just transferring the funds, or it is no point in just investing on one sector and leaving the other sector away. So it is very, very important to see that we start focusing on that system and then start building it up altogether. Moving forward. In December 2002, the Government of India, through the 86th Amendment on the Constitution of India, made free and compulsory education as a fundamental right for all children up to the age of 14 years. So this is a very big step that we did in the year December 2002. Why? Because we wanted to make education as a fundamental right. We did not want education to be a choice. We wanted education to become a right. We wanted education to be the topmost priority, a mandatory cause for development. So we said that for every child in India up to the age of 14 years, let's say up to the secondary level schooling, we wanted everybody to attend school, everybody to become a minimum literate as far as possible. I would not use the word graduate, I would say the word literate, which means to say that at least you are able to read, write and speak the basic language, you are able to do a basic amount of analysis and understanding altogether. So there was a committee that was created known as the Tapas Majumdar Committee, which was appointed by the Government of India in the year 1998, which estimated the expenditure around 1.37 lakh crore. Let me just write it down for you. Why? Because 1.37 lakh crore was the estimation that was done by this committee in terms of bringing in all the children back to school or that particular year. Probably now, when I'm talking about it 20 years later, the budget would have definitely been on the higher side, but that was the requirement, that was the kind of focus that we wanted in terms of education, in terms of bringing in every children under the fundamental right and making education a topmost priority. So definitely looking at this recommendation, at this growth factor altogether, this kind of ideology of bringing in the elementary education to a top priority focus was a positive development, was a positive benefit in terms of economic growth. After this, there were many other committees that also came up, and they were more in recommendation in terms of improving the quality of education, creating institutions of higher order, higher research, higher benefits altogether. But all these factors were not coming in picture in tandem at one shot. They were able to do it in a phased-wise manner, and then we have now been seeing that India is having more than 7,000 private universities, and we have a lot of schools and colleges here and there. So definitely the education sector has seen a tremendous growth from 2002 to 2020 altogether. Now, moving forward, compared to this, the desired level of education expenditure of around 6% of GDP, the current level is little over 4%. That has been quite inadequate. Of course, there has been always a comparison and contrast when you talk about the Ministry of HRD, Human Resources Development, where people have always been complaining and criticizing on the fact that the HRD ministry does not get a lion's share of the GDP. Probably the reason is that many a times people have questioned about what is the real contribution of education towards the society, and we have not been able to see much of educational aids during the year 2002-2005. But after that, the GDPs, the budgets that have been presented till the year 2019-20 altogether, we have been able to see that a lot of help, a lot of improvements have happened in the sector of education. A lot of of private universities have come. We have set up a lot of research chairs and foundation which has been promoting the growth altogether. And not to forget, today if you start seeing the push for digital education in India, online education has been capturing as a viral effect all over the world. So India is also becoming a pioneer when it comes to the digital education push altogether. So in that sense, now the GDP is also trying to focus, make a shift over the online education system, which is more of a services sector altogether. But they are seeing that this online education is picking up pace and it is able to provide education to millions of people across our country. So somewhere down the lane, we have not forgotten education. We have always kept it at the corner of the mind. We have always kept it as a top priority, and we have been trying to focus on the sector again and again with a lot of innovations, with a lot of benefits coming around. So the goal that we want to see of that 6% needs to be reached. This has to be accepted for the coming years. Now, we are not on the 6%. We have doubled, we have tripled almost. So right now, we need to keep this thing in our mind that about 20% of our GDP needs to reach the education sector, especially in the rural, especially at the elementary level, because that is what going to lay a solid foundation for India. If Indian education system has to transform, it has to transform at the root level. There is no point in again going back to those big urban cities or tier 2 cities where you see those big universities coming up with modern high-tech campus. The same thing needs to happen at the root level, at the rural schools, elementary education level, which will actually create an interest among the students, which will actually help them to create a solid fundamental knowledge base. With all that in mind, then we will be able to go forward and create an India with an enhanced economic capacity. With this, we come to the conclusion for today's session. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful session today. In the next session, we will be seeing about a little bit on the future prospects of human capital formation. Thank you once again for joining me today.